triple threat. Matt's an outstanding birder, and he's an outstanding gardener.
You're good to go.
He's an outstanding photographer, an outstanding communicator, and he pulls it all together. And you won't want to miss that. And there'll be a tie-in because, of course, that's the time when any of these species could actually be going through your yard, and you might have the opportunity to encounter them in all of the new native plantings that you put into your yard, utilizing plants from Meadow City Nursery and others. So that's the things that are coming up. Today's program, you guys are in for a real treat. I had a chance to chat with Julie yesterday, and she is just a remarkable person, but an amazing background. She spent the first 8 years of her life in Novosibirsk in Siberia, which is an interesting place. Her parents were missionaries, and she had mentioned the fact that it seemed that in Novosibirsk there was green space everywhere, and she grew up with that opportunity to engage in nature. And that was she said it was a really happy childhood, and those things stuck with her. Coming back to the US, she grew up in more rural parts of Virginia, which provided more opportunities, I'm sure, for connecting with nature. She went to the University of Virginia and majored in
Russian studies and studio art.
Russian studies, right. So you were expecting restoration ecology. That doesn't come yet. And after that, went back to Russia for a stint, but ultimately was being drawn to nature. So she returns to the US and does a stint both volunteering at and then serving as a naturalist for Grayson Highlands State Park near Mount Rogers, for Virginia's highest peak. And there she credits the coming, first of all, being a naturalist. She gave a great line of being a naturalist. All you need to be is sort of one answer ahead of the questions of your audience. You don't need to have a comprehensive knowledge or a totally in-depth knowledge. But she was captivated by the headwater peatlands and the mountain bogs and a lot of the habitats that were there. Anyway, that inspired her to get further education at Christopher Newport University. Ultimately, all of this brings her to Ohio State University as a grad student and getting a degree in restoration ecology. And she did a lot of work in bogs of northeastern Ohio. Many of them you guys probably know about, like Singer Lake and Fern Lake and Triangle Lake and Browns Lake Bog. But this idea of restoration ecology, she formed a restoration ecology group on campus, a club. And in that club, she had people like David and Alyssa were part of that, who are her current partners in her enterprise. And not only were they doing restoration projects along the river there near Ohio State, but it got her thinking about restoration ecology on private lands, and more precisely how to inspire people to do things, in their own backyard. She did a stint with Gail Martin in Columbus at Natives in Harmony, and sort of got the whole idea about the nursery business, as well as a book from Indigenous Landscapes, which had the entire recipe to grow a business. And with that, Alyssa, who was from the Northern Ohio area, had returned to the Cleveland area. So she came following, and they opened up Meadow City Nursery. And that's the tale that she's going to tell. And we're really very, very happy that she's here, because that whole idea of where to source native plants, it's one that, as all of us are turning our yards to natives, where we get the natives to actually put in the yards is a big question. So great story about a great enterprise. It's very important. And she is here to tell her story. So Julie, take it away.
Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction. Okay, I'm going to try to share my screen. Okay, look okay? All right. Well, thank you everybody so much for coming to hear me talk. As Harvey said, I'm Julie, and I co-own Meadow City Native Plant Nursery in Cleveland. And on this day, 2 years ago, I was covered from head to toe in mud, desperately digging holes to put up a fence on a vacant lot. And I wanted to tell you today about how, with my team and with our community partners, we hope to use that small vacant lot to boost biodiversity throughout our region. So these are my co-founders, Alyssa Zerly and Dave Tomaszewski. You may have already heard Dave speak at one of the other webinars through the series. We met while getting our master's in environment and natural resources at Ohio State. And while we were in school, we were involved together in starting a student chapter of the Society for Ecological Restoration. And after we graduated, a really influential book came out that you may be familiar with on the importance of native plants, Nature's Best Hope by Doug Tallamy. And then during the pandemic, gardeners around the country turned towards creating native habitat with native plants. And we went a little step further. So I quit my job in environmental consulting, and Alyssa quit hers at Ohio State. I worked for a season at a native plant nursery called Natives in Harmony, and Alyssa went to work in the Holden Arboretum to learn how to grow native plants. And then soon after that, Dave started helping us out, and we quickly found out how good he was with customers and with helping people choose native plants. So we poached him too from his job at OSU. So I'm the nursery director, Alyssa's our plant production manager, and Dave is our education specialist. And we started Meadow City because we really wanted to fight habitat loss, which is the leading cause of some troubling wildlife declines. So when we think about habitat loss, we often imagine something like this that happens somewhere really far away. But in the US, habitat loss often looks something more like this. By replacing our native ecosystems with lawn, we create a fragmented landscape. And the wildlife that's living in those fragments of habitat is then a lot more vulnerable to external threats and stresses like climate change, novel pests and diseases, and invasive species. So let's take a look briefly at some of the trends that we're seeing today. In North America, we've lost between a quarter and a third of our bird population since 1970. That's 3 billion fewer birds than we used to have. In Ohio, we have some really good historical butterfly data, and it shows that we lost a third of our butterfly population over the course of just 20 years since I was in high school. And looking at bees, we find that over a quarter of our bumblebee species are at risk of extinction. So with combating habitat loss, whether you're working in a residential yard or in a large landscape, restoring habitat means putting native plants back on the land. And our native trees, shrubs, wildflowers, and grasses, they've been in our area for thousands of years. And during that long time, they've been able to co-evolve with local insects and other wildlife. And it's because they have these specialized relationships with wildlife that native plants form the base of the food chain that supports biodiversity. And without them, those insects and the birds and animals that eat those insects, they just can't survive. Unfortunately, the plants that we sometimes plant that are introduced from other parts of the globe, they just don't support biodiversity in the same way because they can't feed those specialist insects and wildlife. Now, unfortunately, native plants can be hard to find, as stated by the survey respondent who said that the average homeowner or facilities manager can't find native plants easily, has trouble telling what's native and what's not in nursery stock, and they can't tell what the provenance of the plants is. And this was part of a broader survey which found conservationists saying much the same thing throughout the eastern US. That idea is supported by the Mount Cuba Center, who did a study of large conventional nurseries. You can imagine that the plantings in people's yards are largely going to be reflected by what's available in local nurseries. And in those nurseries, overall, 70% of the perennials being sold are non-native. And in the remaining plants, only 6% were our native wild type species that really resemble what's out in the wild, rather than a cultivated or hybrid variety. On top of that, 4% of the plants being sold were listed as introduced invasive plants or were on an invasive watch list. These are the plants that escape into our parks and our preserves, and they degrade habitat by crowding out beneficial native plants. And this is why we wanted to create a 100% native local ecotype nursery. Our goal was really to make it easy for anyone to create habitat in their land. And we wanted to help people grow their connection to the local ecosystem through their experience in their own yards. So to get started with our nursery, we knew that we needed some land, we needed some native seeds, and we needed a public that was aware of the benefits of native plants. And being a team of just 3, we knew we couldn't do it all by ourselves. Fortunately, here in Greater Cleveland, we're part of a really vibrant community of nature lovers, including you guys. So today we're going to take the opportunity to highlight a few of our partners that we've worked with. Okay, so I'm going to start with land. So as I mentioned before, we'd experienced for ourselves how hard it can be to get your hands on plants, on native plants. In a lot of cities, you need to drive pretty far out of town to find a specialized native plant grower, or you can wait for a one-day sale for like a great selection, but it's during a short amount of time. And we really wanted to start a nursery that would be easy to get to, that would have regular open hours so that more people could discover these plants for themselves. So, when thinking about where we could start a nursery, we actually looked in a few different cities, but land is pretty expensive. But Dave and Alyssa both have roots in Cleveland, and they had done research on vacant lots here. So we thought that if it was Cleveland, we might be able to afford to start something in the city itself where people could find it. Okay, so this is the first iteration of the nursery. It actually started in a friend's backyard. It was Roy Larrick from Bluestone Conservation who let us use his big yard in Euclid. And this is where we grew our first plants for our first pop-up sales. In 2023, we graduated to this vacant lot that we leased from the city. It's 1/3 of an acre, and the spot used to have a house, but it's been sitting vacant for the last 10 years. Now, just having vacant land isn't quite enough. The city of Cleveland has done a lot of work around vacant land reuse, and we're able to sell the plants on site thanks to the urban agriculture programs that they created. So that kind of made the barrier to entry really low, and we were able to start the nursery with just our savings. Okay, so here's our first day of construction 2 years ago. We thought that we'd get the fence done in a weekend with just a few friends, but that didn't end up being the case, hence the 3 weeks digging in the mud that I mentioned before. But 2 years in, this is what the nursery looks like so far. Our nursery is located in the North Collinwood neighborhood near the Waterloo Arts District. It's really easy to find, and it's located just off I-90. We estimate that we're within a 15 to 20-minute drive of just about anywhere in Cleveland and many of the surrounding suburbs. So getting this lot allowed us to bring native plants to within a 20-minute drive of about 700,000 people. Okay, so because we're in person, we're able to provide a high level of assistance to make sure that people are really successful with their plants. So if you come to the nursery, you're going to be greeted by one of us, usually Dave, and he'll show you around and offer you help with picking out native plants. We have the plants organized by growing condition and by bloom time to make choosing the plants extra easy, and every plant has a sign with some important information on it about the plant. For those of you who might like plants in part because you don't love interacting with people, we've got you. We let people order online for pickup at the nursery, and we've tried to replicate the experience of shopping in person with filters on our website that can help you choose the right plant, as well as detailed plant descriptions. So beside the nursery, which is inside the fence there, we've started a garden. And we hope that people can see what the plants look like there once they've matured. We've got 1/3 of an acre to work with the garden, and we'd like to create over time a beautiful green space for the neighborhood, as well as an educational display garden there that serves as an inspiration. This year, we're going to be offering kind of monthly garden work days where people can come out, help us maintain the garden, and also learn some of the basics of gardening. So Alyssa grows all of our plants on site from seed. She's really a real stickler for quality, and people tell us that our plants establish really quickly in the garden. We use plastic-free pots, and we don't use any pesticides that would persist on the plants and harm insects in your yard. And because we're space limited, we actually teamed up with Westwood Conservancy to source and store our potting soil, which is peat-free. Around the corner from the nursery, we've got a new area, which Alyssa is calling Baby's First Tree Nursery. We plan to use this space to grow native trees and shrubs on a small scale before hopefully graduating to a larger site for the trees and shrubs in the next few years. And if we expand, we're going to need a lot more seed, which leads me to the need for seed. Okay, so at Meadow City, we're kind of obsessed with seeds. We collect our own wild seed throughout the region, and I actually get to do most of this work, and it's like a treasure hunt. Even though it's a lot of work and time, it's one of the most fun parts of the job. Now, in our seed collection, we're guided by the International Principles and Standards for Native Seeds and Ecological Restoration. This guide instructs us on how to sustainably harvest the seed without impacting wild populations of plants. So we collect no more than 20% of seeds that are ripe on a given day to avoid impacting that population, and usually it's much less than that. We also are careful with where we source our seeds from. So we grow local ecotype plants, which just means that the seed is descended from local wild populations. We stick to the Erie, Ontario Lake Plain, shown here in blue and in tan, and occasionally we venture into the Huron-Erie Lake Plain, which is shown to the west in brown. The reason we do this is to ensure that the plants are really well adapted to our growing condition, especially the climate. So in the eastern US, some of our biggest seed growers are located in the upper Midwest, which is north of here. And we want to make sure that our plants are going to be resilient to the warmer temperatures that are coming our way to climate change. We also want to make sure that they're going to bloom at the right time when pollinators need them. So last year, we saw a lot of pictures of asters, which are a fall blooming plant, blooming in people's gardens in July. And we don't want that. You know, we want to make sure that fall flowers are still blooming in the fall when monarchs are migrating through and they need the nectar. So we want to at least make sure that our plants are blooming in sync with our local wild populations. And then finally, we want to collect genetically diverse seed. So whenever possible, we aim to collect from 50 different individual parent plants instead of just collecting a ton of seed from one parent plant. The hope is that if we have genetically diverse plantings, there's going to be some genetic resistance in there to new challenges like novel pests and diseases or to extremes in climate. We also want to avoid inbreeding. So if you were colonizing a new planet, you wouldn't want to send just one couple, right? The same goes for establishing a new population of plants. You want to make sure that there's genetic diversity in there so it stays healthy. So this is kind of a lot to consider. And to be honest, we weren't sure if we would really be able to create a local ecotype nursery when we got started. We don't collect seeds without permission, and it can sometimes be hard to get permission to collect seed. But fortunately, the first year we got access to 3 pieces of private land and 2 pieces of protected land. I didn't know if that would be enough. What if there weren't any good plants there? You know, these weren't necessarily all high quality preserves. But as the seasons changed, I was really amazed to discover that the sites that we had access to had really diverse plant communities. It turns out that there's some really high quality sites throughout Northeast Ohio, even outside of our parks and preserves. So that first year, we were able to start with a good selection of 50 different native plant species. These days, we have around 20 sites throughout our ecoregion, and they're primarily privately owned. We really appreciate people trusting us and allowing us on their land, and we try to make sure that they're able to learn something about the plants that grow on their land. We also work with a few conservation organizations. We're not going to name them all here, but I want to highlight just one. Summit Metro Parks has been a really good partner to us. They've actually created a program where they invite growers to request permission to collect native seed and to start seed plots for their plant production. So thanks to them, we've been able to add a few species, including wild columbine shown here. It's a plant that's native to our region, but it just doesn't show up a lot. It hasn't shown up at any of our other sites. So now we're able to offer it at the nursery. Okay, and this is something I'm very excited about this year. To reduce the amount of wild seed collection we do, and also to help us not be so limited by the amount of wild seed we're able to sustainably collect, we're working on leasing some more vacant land just down the road from the nursery so that we can plant some large, genetically diverse native seed plots. And these seed plots, we're not going to produce seeds for sale. It's not quite enough for that, but they're going to be used in our plant production so that we can grow more plants at more different sizes. To grow native seeds for sale, you really have to have a farm. And unfortunately, it's pretty difficult to get purchase local ecotype native seed in the Eastern US. Most seed growers just don't track the wild origin of their seeds, especially to the ecoregion level. But we've been partnering with a Northeast Ohio grower called Native Beginnings, and he's really committed to tracking the source of his seed. We've shared some of our wild collected seed with him, and there are a few species that we buy from him instead of collecting ourselves. Ultimately, the goal would be that everyone, including us, could just go out and buy local ecotype seeds from someone like Native Beginnings. And in some parts of the country, this has actually come about because of larger partnerships between conservation orgs and seed growers. So we're actually really excited that Holden Forests and Gardens has started a native seed bank to solve this very issue. It's led by Kim Lessman, and she'll be working with the Lake Erie Allegheny Partnership to develop a local ecotype seed supply chain. It's a really big undertaking, but I think she's been making good headway. And among the other benefits, the ecological benefits of local ecotype seed, we really hope it'll lead people to think of their land as part of the surrounding ecosystem, because they're going to be literally allowing the surrounding landscape to colonize their lawns and their gardens. Okay, so here we are in fall 2022. We've spent months collecting wild seed. We quit our jobs, and we've grown all these plants. And if you could see what I was thinking in this picture, I might be thinking, is anyone going to want to buy these plants? So we knew that we really needed a public that had some awareness of the benefits of native plants. We named the nursery Meadow City because we imagined a city with abundant habitat. And to achieve that, we know that we need to reach people from all kinds of different backgrounds. There's a lot that needs to happen to shift someone's perception, of a great yard from pristine lawn to homegrown habitat. So when we started the nursery, we actually found that the road had been paved for us by many, and many people were already aware of the benefits of native plants. We're not going to name everybody, but I wanted to highlight a couple of examples. I think Peggy might actually be on this call, and she started the Heights Native Pollinator Path. If you drive or walk through Cleveland Heights, you'll see streets lined with tiny tree lawn gardens and with lush front yard habitat. It's a really cool movement, and it shows the power of a couple of people to start something big. So we're also grateful to Ann Cicerella, who's been a pioneer through these symposia that she's put on for many years now. She's brought some excellent speakers on habitat and native plants to our area to talk about the topic. Also, Nature in My Backyard, who's hosting this very webinar, came about, I think, after we started the nursery. And if you're not aware, one really cool service that they offer is that if you register your garden with them, you can request to have trained volunteers come to your yard and give you advice on how to get started in creating habitat. It's a really cool project, and I hope it'll be a model for other cities. At Meadow City, we also take the opportunity, every opportunity we can to do education and outreach. Dave is really our public speaker, not me normally. And he's built a great repertoire of well-researched talks on topics from bumblebees to soft landing gardens to butterflies. And we love sending him to talk to garden clubs and neighborhood associations and the like. We also offer hands-on workshops at the nursery. interacting with our customers, especially younger folks, we've noticed that there's often a gap between wanting to do something eco-friendly in your yard and having the skills to know what to do. So we've been experimenting with different ways to help. And one thing that we rolled out last year is our Shrink Your Lawn kits. And this is just, it's a kit where people can come to the nursery to pick up some supplies to smother their yards and start a native garden. It just takes them 15 minutes to deploy, and it kind of lowers the bar to entry. You don't have to do, anything crazy to get your garden started. Sneak peek of something we're working on. We'd really like to create some pre-designed garden kits to reduce the amount of research and work that people need to do to start like a larger garden. So imagine if you could come to the nursery and purchase an affordable plant kit that would actually be modeled on a local ecosystem like Castalia Prairie in Erie County that's shown in this picture. We could even offer like a guided tour of that wildlife preserve for people who purchase the kit, so that you could have a deeper understanding of the plant community that you planted in your yard. Dave has been doing some plant and soil surveys of local meadows and sites so that we can offer these in the future. And we're really excited to help people feel more connected to surrounding landscapes through their gardens. We also work closely with other local organizations. We helped Wild Ones Greater Cleveland start the Northeast Ohio Native Habitat Corridor, which was directly inspired by the Heights Native Pollinator Pathway. And you can actually, there's a map you can add yourself to, and there's these signs that you can actually purchase at the nursery. We also collaborate with the National Wildlife Federation Sacred Grounds Program and with the Western Reserve Land Conservancy on native plant giveaways. We always try to give a little more than just plants, because sometimes people need some knowledge and skills to know what to do. So in the case of Sacred Grounds, we offer a special presentation for participants. And for Western Reserve, we've made a handout that kind of tells people about the plants they're getting and how to take care of them. And we're also looking for ways to give back to our own neighborhood. So last fall, we held our first free native plant day. Part of it was a plant giveaway, and the rest was showing people that native plants don't necessarily have to cost money and come from a nursery. They reproduce themselves. So we had workshops on growing native plants from seed and on how to divide plants in your garden to share with neighbors or just spread around your yard. So in all of this, our most important partners are you guys. By creating habitat in your yard, not only are you supporting biodiversity, but you're giving permission to people around you to do the same thing. And we really hope that native plant gardens become one way that people develop a deeper connection with their local protected areas and wild places. We hope that when people hear about threats to bird and insects in the future, they also think of their birds and insects that are in their yard, and they're more motivated to act to protect the environment. And that's all I got. I'd be happy to answer any questions you guys have.
Thank you, Julie. It's brilliant. Let me take a look at the chats here. First question, Melanie was asking, do you work with Western Reserve Land Conservancy at all? You have obviously said you did, but for seed collection or to populate their lands with natives?
Oh, great question. We have collected seed on Western Reserve property for, like, we had a 1-year permit and we were able to collect some great seed. I think that for some organizations, it can be tricky to allow a nursery to collect seed just because they're a nonprofit and their main task is to protect their land. And then we're collecting seed and selling something. I think our missions align really well, but I think legally sometimes it can be tricky. But we do work with Summit Metro Parks and a number of other organizations, and we've been able to access some really nice high quality sites with good plants on them.
And you invoked LEAP before, the Lake Erie Allegheny Partnership for Biodiversity. Do you have you tried to, in terms of gaining sites to places to collect seed, have you tried to work that network beyond the players you mentioned?
A little bit, yeah. We're part of LEAP. And to be honest, this year I wrote to some more to some more conservation orgs and got access to some more sites that we're really excited about. And I don't want to ask anybody else because I don't think we're going to have time to visit all the cool places that we have access to. So it's a great problem to have. It does take some time, we get a lot of questions about, species that we really want to offer, but we're not able to offer yet. It takes some time to bring a new plant into production. So, if we collect seed this year, if it's a small population, we might not sell the plants from that plant next year. We might plant out a captive population that we can collect seeds from in the future. So then, it's like 3 or 4 years until we're able to offer the plant at the nursery.
Which brings up just a question I have about your whole business model. So are we self-sustaining? Are we in the black, or both how you are now and then how you see this path going forward as a viable business?
Yeah, every year I think that this year everyone will get paid a small but normal amount, which is great. Honestly, the seed collection, it's definitely a time investment up front, but we're getting these seed gardens started. And once we have those started, we're going to have a lot of seed to grow more plants. Our costs are pretty low. Mostly we've been spending money on adding more area. And I think we'll be done with that this year. So I don't know if that answers.
Well, clearly it's your passion that's driving this. So I have a question from Sunstone Garden. Longtime gardener here, first year native grower. I started this year with a fully temperature controlled glass greenhouse and am currently growing 18 varieties of natives sourced from Prairie Moon. I was moved to start growing these to get natives to my garden clients. Now that I've heard your story, I'm inspired to keep going. I'm in Youngstown, Ohio. How can I best help as an advocate going forward?
So this is someone who supports landscapers? I think I missed the beginning of the question.
It just said longtime gardener here, first time native grower. And she
garden plants. Yeah. Oh yeah. Okay. This is Sunstone Garden. Well, I think this, advocating for native plants probably looks different for different people. I think, for most homeowners, for most gardeners, something inspiring that I read is that, in a given neighborhood, people's planting decisions are less affected by like national trends and more affected by what their neighbors are doing. So if you live in a neighborhood where, everybody has a manicured lawn, it's a lot harder to start doing some kind of natural gardening because you don't want to be a sore thumb. But if you live in a neighborhood where a few people are already doing it, you might be kind of interested and feel a little more free to try it out. So I think, kind of pioneering that in your own yard and making people feel comfortable doing that is a really, it's not a small move. I think, if you're part of like any kind of club, like a Rotary Club or a neighborhood association, a lot of these organizations have kind of somewhere a written goal of helping the environment. So inviting a speaker to come speak to your club and kind of, grab people's attention for a while, I think is a really nice move too.
Cool. Jane weighed in just to remind everybody that those who register for Nature in My Backyard, the visits are a free service. She wants to underscore that. We have a question. I live in New Philadelphia. Is there anyone in the area who could help me with my yard? That's kind of this to the south of our area.
I'm not super familiar with New Philadelphia.
So it's south of Canton.
South of Canton.
Some distance.
Okay. There's a native plant nursery in Canton called Powell's Native Wildflowers. So that's a good, closer to you source of plants that you could try. If you're interested in like a landscaper, on our website, we put together kind of a mini directory of landscapers that work with native plants. So you could look on there and see if there's anyone close to you or someone who'd be willing to come out and work with you.
Cool.
Summit Metro, I mean, if that's in Summit County, Summit
No.
Metro Parks has a really cool wild backyards program. So I would try to get connected with that too.
From the Sunstone Garden, the comment was to answer my question about the business thing to you. The response was, my goal is always to make enough money that my husband doesn't make me get a real job. LOL. It's really a labor of love. Then we
We're
have a
definitely
question.
not in it to get rich. I will say, I'd love to, we have these different things that are kind of extra. We do a lot of education, we do all the seed collection. But we do want to show that this can be, a business model. Like I'd love for more conventional nurseries to offer more native plants and to not think of it as, this weird niche thing. So.
Cool. Very cool. Yeah. If the big boys took a interest in what you were doing. I have a plot ready for planting as used cardboard to kill the grass over the winter. It is about 10 feet long and 6 foot wide. There's a chain link fence along the back. To get started, what 3 plants should I buy? From tallest in the back along the fence, then shorter ones, then even shorter ones in the front.
All right, I'm on the spot. I mean, I think an important thing to consider, you can probably fit more diversity in an area that large. So I think, having a good diversity of plants will ensure that you have more continuous blooms for beauty and for pollinators. But, you definitely want something blooming in spring/early summer, midsummer, and fall. If you're working in the full sun, one of the earliest blooming plants is golden Alexanders. So you could try that. It also supports swallowtail butterfly caterpillars on its leaves, which is kind of neat. For midsummer, I mean, you could do swamp milkweed. That's a really good pollinator attractant, and it's always fun to get monarch caterpillars in your yard. For fall, I think every garden should include a species of goldenrod. There's a lot of different goldenrod species and they're really pretty. Wrinkle leaf goldenrod is quite nice. It's like a keystone plant. It supports a lot of different caterpillars and it's beneficial to a wide array of pollinators. Yeah.
Then let's see, we have Melanie says, I'm working with native landscapes right now. They are terrific and very knowledgeable.
Awesome. Good recommendation.
Then Matt chimed in that he does a program called Native Plants for Birds, Insects, and Biodiversity. It's been requested several times this year. He just mentions if you know of organizations looking for something like this, definitely let the Audubon Society of Greater Cleveland know.
Okay.
And we don't charge a fixed fee for those things. Happy to take donations back to support the mothership, but it's a great way to get the message out. Scott has a question. Until Meadow City has shrubs and trees available for sale, what nurseries are selling shrubs and trees in the Cleveland area?
Great question. Yeah, we will have some shrubs and trees this year. I feel like ever since we started, I've said next year is the year. Next year we're going to have a lot. So we're getting there. Avonlea Gardens in Chardon offers shrubs and trees, and that's where I normally direct people if that's what they're looking for. You can also, a lot of times your local soil and water conservation district will offer like bare root trees and shrubs pretty affordably. So that can be another place to look, but they're usually like in the spring and there's kind of a deadline to order.
Peggy wants everyone to remind everyone that Meadow City and 3 other local native plant nurseries will be together at a sale May 31st from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. at Forest Hill Church in Cleveland Heights. Terry asks, could Cuyahoga County Master Gardeners be trained as seed collectors and do volunteer collecting?
We haven't used volunteers yet for seed collecting. I think uh, I think if folks are interested in volunteering to collect seed, I would reach out to the Holden Seed Bank and to Pollinator Partnership. For us, because I we haven't quite figured out like the level of training that would be required. And then we often have to coordinate with our landowners because they're private landowners. And sometimes they're not able to be super flexible with the timing that people are coming. So far we haven't really relied on volunteers for that.
So is that a really important, I mean, you stress the fact that you only have the, ecotypes from this particular region. If somebody shows up with a pocket full of acorns, then you're probably gonna, how do I know what the provenance of these acorns is? And is that part of it, is just knowing exactly where the source location is?
We're pretty picky about where our seeds come from. So
Right.
we would want to make sure that they're doing things our way. If any of you have ever come to the nursery and brought me seeds from your garden, I'm so sorry if we've kind of been like, where did these come from? But we, on our tags for the plants, we write kind of the wild origin of the seed. So we try to make sure that we're very confident in where they come from.
This is the connoisseurs of, getting the good stuff.
Snobs.
Um,
Sorry.
so the next question from Patricia is, how critical is it to only plant plants from within your ecosystem? And I'm trying to figure out the strip above the Erie, Ontario Lake Plain, which seems to be part of Meadow City's 20-minute drive area.
Oh, if you're looking at that little tan band kind of that's like along the lake shore, that's also part of the ecoregion. And we also collect there. I think probably different organizations and different people would have kind of different levels of specificity that they really care about. That map that I showed, it's from the EPA has these different levels of ecoregion. And that strip along the lake, as well as kind of the other area below it, it's like the unglaciated Allegheny Plateau. And that's sort of what we use as our
So,
core
so
ecosystem.
the way I learned it is that we are mostly in the glaciated Allegheny
Oh,
Plateau.
did I say
Yeah,
unglaciated? I meant
and then,
glaciated.
but that strip along the lake is actually it's Lake Plain, so it's the equivalent of Lake Plain out to the west, because that was all part of the ancestors of Lake Erie, glacial Lake Maumee and Lake Warren, and all these higher levels, and the deposits there, totally different soil types, as well as the parallel beach ridges, which are an interesting habitat unto themselves. Okay, cool. And then Melissa just mentioned Avonlea in Chardon has some of the trees and shrubs. Now we have a question. I have a plot ready for planting.
Oh, I think
That's
they
just
said that.
been repeated, right? I have a Monarch Waystation toolkit on my website that includes a design for a space your size, totally free to download. That is from Sunstone Garden. Then we have new gardener here. Jess says, I'm currently setting up my first garden using your shrink your lawn method. While the grass withers away over the coming weeks, I'm researching native flowers to plant. Question for you. What resource do you recommend to research different types of the same plant, like goldenrod, for example? Do different varieties of goldenrod serve different purposes? Good question.
That's a great question. I don't say this just because I own a nursery, but I think often a good place to start is your local native plant nursery because sometimes you can do a lot of research or like find the perfect plant list, but then it's hard to find the plants on that list. So going to your nursery and talking to the owner can be very helpful. On our website, we have like different filters and big descriptions of every goldenrod, and it lists, where it grows and what it's like. If you're looking for other resources, the Missouri Botanical Garden has a nice resource that sort of, it talks a lot about gardening applications. So it can tell you, sometimes something grows, especially like plants that love a wet habitat in the wild. You always see them in a wet habitat, but in a garden, they can actually handle a little bit drier habitat. So it has kind of more of that gardening information. And then another resource we like is Illinois Wildflowers. They have kind of a more ecological take on the plants and can tell you where you can find them in the wild. So you can just Google Missouri Botanical Garden and then the scientific name of your plant, or Illinois Wildflowers.
Yeah, cool. I remember, I don't know if it's available anymore, but the Museum of Natural History put out a wonderful guide to the goldenrods of this region. I don't know if there's a stash still at the museum. I don't know that it's available anywhere else, but that Jim Bissell put together, and Judy Semrock was part of that. I think Renee Barranco is the one that masterminded its actual publication. But it's amazing how many varieties, 30 varieties or so, and then how curious the habitats are, like zigzag, goldenrod, and some of these other ones that maybe they wouldn't be appropriate for a yard, but it's interesting to find out about the diversity within the goldenrod group, different habitats they cover.
Yeah, that's a great book if you can find it.
Okay, here's a question. If you start a garden, is there a lot of work to keep it vibrant? Question mark. Is it weeding, etc.? Question mark.
That's a great question. Yeah, I think some people think, oh, a native garden, it's no maintenance because it's wild. I think the main piece of maintenance that's required is weeding. There's some things you can do to reduce the amount of work you need to do. Planting more densely can help your garden fill in, and then those plants are going to outcompete and block weed seeds coming in. Using mulch when you start out can prevent weeds from getting established. We also have this.
Not to interrupt,
Julie, am I getting into the weeds?
No, not at all. But it's that whole idea of, if I go to Meadow City and I buy one of something and take it home and put it in the yard, don't expect it to immediately take over the yard. The whole idea of planting in numbers and in bunches, so that your plants have an opportunity to outcompete the weeds, is a pretty important strategy, I would imagine.
Yeah, we normally recommend people plant about 1.5 to a foot apart. It's a bit different from maybe your more traditional, like, big mulch bed with a few plants. Some of the benefits there are, you just have more abundant flowers, which is more resources for pollinators. They also support each other better, so they don't get tall and then flop over, and then you're not having to weed as much. There's also some, I don't know, I don't want to get too in the weeds, but we've got like this special weeding hoe that we really love at the nursery, where you can stand up and you're not having to be on the ground pulling things out. So there's some ways to make it less work. I think once the garden is established, it's really not very much work, and it's enjoyable because you're getting to spend time in your garden and see what it's doing. So
if customers start flocking to Meadow City when you open after May 1st and request a demonstration of your weeding technique.
Yeah. We do that all the time. We're like, here, let me show you this hoe. We're going to show you. You can
send Dave out there with a hoe.
Absolutely.
Let's see. Robin just reminds us that Nature in My Backyard actually has a few copies of Jim Bissell's Goldenrod book. And you can ask us. I don't know how many we've got and how we deal with that. It was a wonderful resource from the same group that brought you also that magnificent Dragonfly and Damselfly Guide to Northeastern Ohio that I don't know if it's still in print or not, but very, very cool. Okay, so I think we've covered all of the questions that have been posted. This whole idea of the regional ecosystem kits I find really interesting. And if you have a kit, so how do you have someone sort of vet their unique habitat or microhabitat requirements? So I've got Castelia Prairie. Well, Castelia Prairie is growing on marly soils and things, probably not the miserable clay soil that I have in my Kirtland backyard. So, what are the conditions that I might need? I think it's a brilliant idea. I love it because of the synergy that these are the plants that should be growing together in a functional habitat. Do you see that as how do you see that going forward? I think it's a really ambitious and cool idea.
Yeah, that's a great question. For most of the plants that we offer, it's really soil moisture and light levels are the most important thing. Even if, this ecosystem occurs in the wild on these specific soils, it doesn't necessarily have to be that in your yard. But I think it would be very cool to match, to make that close match. Like you have this
Right.
soil, these ecosystems would do really well. Alyssa and Dave, they both have a soil science background. They worked at a soil lab before starting Meadow City. This summer, we're thinking of like having a little workshop where people can bring in a soil sample and we can help tell them what texture it is and measure the pH. But I don't think that, I think for the kits, for the most part, I don't think that people necessarily have to have that very close, match, because I don't think most people probably have, the conditions of Castalia Prairie are very unique.
Yeah.
But those plants are plants that we grow in our garden, and they do okay.
Cool. I think that we've covered all of the questions. If anybody else, any other questions, we still have everybody on the line here. Somebody says there is a video on YouTube about, quote, Japan's tiny forests are thriving in, I assume that means Britain. I talks about planting more densely that otherwise. I'm not sure exactly what that meant, but this idea of these tiny forests, I believe that rooted in trees, and the Cleveland Zoo just put in a tiny forest on the zoo grounds. And what are the benefits to taking a postage stamp parcel and then just densely planting it, barrage planting it with a little forest? Are you guys interested? Are you knowledgeable about that? Are you guys looking to participate in those types of endeavors?
I'm not super knowledgeable about like I know that there have been some tiny forest initiatives. I'd like to read more about how they do here versus like in kind of more tropical ecosystems where they were started. I think with perennials, certainly planting densely makes a lot of sense. And then with trees, I think planting trees densely, it just depends. You wouldn't want to plant expensive trees very densely because in the end, you're still going to have one tree. But I think if you're working with bare root or something, and I think planting densely can provide a lot of, biodiversity and, a lot of resources in a small space and reduce the weeding.
Maybe if you enjoy watching competition.
Yeah.
As all those trees compete with one another. Matt asks, is there a recipe for non-peat starting mix, or is there a product out there for sale?
Great question. There's not a lot of peat-free mixes out there available for the public. There's one made by Fox Farms, the company that makes Happy Frog. They have one called like Coco Loco that's based on cocoa coir. I'm not sure that cocoa coir, I think it's maybe marginally more sustainable than peat. I haven't read that much about coir. Also,
and could you speak to
talk about peat?
Why peat isn't, particularly you as a fan of headwater peatlands and mountain bogs?
Yeah, absolutely. So, when you grow or make anything, you're using resources. Our pots are made out of something, the soil is made out of something. There's our growing mix is made mostly out of like pine bark and composted peanut hulls. But so, and sometimes, for example, wood can be used, and wood can be a byproduct, or it can be from wood that was harvested in the forest. So there's, some resource use happening there. If you compare peat to wood or to anything else, the reason using peat is super unsustainable is to harvest peat. So peat is basically, it's poorly decomposed peat moss, and it grows in peatlands, which are a special type of wetland. And to harvest it, they have to drain peatlands to be able to get their equipment on there. And peatlands, they occupy 3% of the Earth's soil or the Earth's surface, but they store about 30% of the Earth's soil carbon underground. So they're really important carbon sinks. And the peat accumulates over thousands of years. If you imagine cutting down a tree, not our favorite thing, cutting down a tree, but they're able to regrow within a lifetime. So they could feasibly be sustainably harvested. The peat accumulates very, very slowly. If you imagine it like a bank, you've got these, huge savings from your ancestors, but they only put a few cents in every day. So to go in there and harvest a bunch of it, it's pretty unsustainable. And then draining the peatlands can allow the carbon that's stored in the peat to be released into the atmosphere and move climate change ahead. So I don't know. It doesn't feel very good to grow plants, even for restoration, from a material that was harvested from a pristine wetland. So that's why we avoid it.
But it's just an interesting point, because when you go to most, garden centers, and you take a look at whether it's, cypress mulch, and, think, oh, this must be a byproduct. Well, no, they're grinding up cypress trees to make that mulch. And the whole idea that, with the peat, you're actually mining peat, that's a better analogy. You're mining it. It's not renewable in a human lifespan. And the consequences to climate change. Good point. Excellent. Okay. The person who talked about the we had a question. Do native plants spread around the neighborhood? Will you get enemies? I guess if your native plants spread around the neighborhood, will you get enemies?
Interesting question. Yeah, there's definitely some native plants that can be spread more aggressively from seed. I don't think it's very, there's some wonderful native plants that are recognized as weeds, like the fleabanes. We love them. Dave thought about, we need a section of the nursery called Fleabane Dave's, because Dave loves those weedy native plants. For the most, I don't think that's really true of most native plants, that they spread that aggressively. If for us at the nursery, there's a few that we sell, which are really useful if you have aggressive non-native invasives. So we sell them, but if we see someone buying them, we're like, now that's going to spread a lot in your yard. I've never heard of someone having an issue where my plant popped up in my neighbor's yard and they were really mad about it. I don't think that will really happen with the vast majority of native plants.
Got it.
Especially if someone has a garden that they're weeding anyway. I don't know.
And we have some comments. Just Christine said, just wonderful to see the natives and how Meadow City are doing great. Neat to learn. Thanks. Matt Lensick said, great session. Thank you for sharing with us. And we are at 1:01. And I know that you've got to be in the Cuyahoga Valley National Park tonight doing another session, educational session along the same lines. So Julie, thank you for your time and your expertise. Thank you, and Alyssa and David, for your vision for Meadow City Nursery. We're really so excited about this resource, and we all want to be able to take advantage of it. So we wish you every good wish and luck for the future. And thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me.
Bye, all.